Friday nights in my restaurant are always the same kind of chaos. Every table is booked solid, people hover at the entrance hoping to snag a cancellation, the bar is three deep with walk-ins trying their luck, and my staff moves through the dining room like they're running a relay race. I'm usually everywhere at once, checking the timing on dishes, stepping in to plate an order if the kitchen is slammed, or circling the floor to greet regulars. To anyone else, the noise and movement would feel overwhelming, but for me, it's the rhythm of a place I've built with my own hands. In the middle of all that, Sarah, my manager, slipped through the kitchen doors. She didn't look stressed, she rarely does, but the slight lift of her eyebrows told me she'd found something worth my attention. I set down the pizza peel I was holding and followed her out. At the host stand stood a man I'd never seen before. Mid-40s, polo shirt tucked too tightly into his jeans, a chunky watch flashing under the lights. He was tapping his fingers against his arm like every second of waiting was a personal insult. His posture radiated impatience. He leaned forward toward the podium as if sheer force of will could conjure a table out of thin air. Sarah leaned closer to me on the way out and murmured that the man claimed to know Tony, the owner, and that he insisted I had promised him a table any time he showed up. That stopped me for a second. My full name is Anthony. Nobody, except my mother when she wants to remind me I haven't called in too long, uses Tony, and certainly not strangers who stroll in without a reservation on the busiest night of the week. I glanced at him again. He wasn't nervous. In fact, he looked smug, like he had already won a battle the rest of us hadn't realized was taking place. The way he stood there made it clear he fully expected to be ushered to the best seat in the house with no questions asked. In that moment, I had a choice. I could have walked over, introduced myself, and shut him down immediately. I could have told him flat out that I was the owner, that we had never met, and that lying about connections was not the way to get a table. But the way he carried himself, so absolutely certain that everyone around him was going to fall in line, made me hesitate. There's a certain satisfaction in letting someone like that play their hand all the way to the end before you flip the table over. So instead of confronting him, I straightened my apron, walked toward the host stand, and greeted him like an old friend. He lit up instantly, relief washing over his face. He acted as though this performance was confirmation of his importance, and I was merely another player in his script. I motioned toward one of the corner booths, a spot usually reserved for true VIPs or longtime regulars, and led him across the dining room. He followed with the posture of someone making a victory lap, shoulders squared, chin raised, already looking around to see who might be noticing him being escorted to the best seat. When he slid into the booth and placed his phone face up on the table, I knew the rest of the night was going to be worth watching. Once he settled into the corner booth, it didn't take long for the show to start. From the way he leaned back, one arm stretched across the top of the seat, it was clear he thought he was holding court rather than sitting in a restaurant. The server approached to offer menus, but before she could even finish her greeting, he was already waving her off, announcing that Tony, meaning me, knew exactly what he liked. He said he'd be getting the special wine, the one I always kept on hand for him. The way he phrased it, like we were old friends with inside jokes, made it sound rehearsed, as if he'd used this tactic in other places before. The server, a young guy who had been with us only a few months, looked confused for a moment. He glanced toward Sarah, who nodded slightly to reassure him, and then disappeared toward the bar. I followed close behind, pretending to busy myself with some notes at the service station. Sarah caught my eye and smirked. She whispered that the man had asked if his appetizer was going to be comped, since Tony always insisted on covering the first round. I told her to go ahead and give him whatever he asked for. If he wanted to play a game, I was going to let him. A bottle of Barolo, our most expensive, was carried out to his table. The man acted like it was the most natural thing in the world, gesturing for the cork to be pulled immediately. He didn't even check the label, just nodded once, then poured himself half a glass before the server could finish the ritual. It was a performance of confidence, but also of assumption. He believed without question that he was entitled to whatever he demanded. As the night went on, his orders grew bolder. He insisted the chef prepare him something off-menu, a dish he claimed I had made for him before, full of seafood and served extra large. In the kitchen, I relayed the request to the chef, who rolled his eyes but pulled lobster, scallops, and shrimp from the cooler anyway. When the dish went out, steaming and rich, the man took credit for its existence, explaining loudly to the couple in the next booth that I always made it for him personally. He gestured toward me when I passed by, nodding like we had just shared a private joke. The staff began reporting each new claim back to me. Apparently, I was his old college buddy. I was also someone I played golf with on weekends. At one point, he even said he had advised me on opening the restaurant, that I owed him a favor or two. Each story contradicted the last, but he told them with such confidence that it almost didn't matter. I let it all happen. Every glass of wine, every side dish he requested without looking at the menu, every little exaggeration he told the people around him. The more he leaned into the role, the more convincing he thought he became, but to everyone else, it was transparent theater. I made no move to correct him, no hint that I saw through the act. Instead, I nodded, approved the orders, and allowed him to dig himself deeper. By the time the entrees were cleared, he was leaning forward, elbows on the table, voice carrying across the dining room. He laughed too loudly, spoke too freely, and gestured broadly as though he were hosting his own event. Other guests were beginning to notice, turning to watch his display. From my vantage point near the kitchen doors, I could see it building into something bigger. He wasn't just trying to scam a free meal anymore. He was performing a role, determined to convince everyone around him that he was somebody important. I had no intention of stopping him, not yet. By the time dessert menus were circulating through the dining room, the man in the polo had reached full volume. He no longer spoke to the server as if ordering. He spoke as though giving instructions to subordinates. Each request was framed as something I personally wanted him to have. He told the staff that Tony would be furious if the wine glass wasn't kept filled, that Tony always insisted his guests be treated like royalty, and that Tony would never forgive them if they didn't bring extra bread before the next course. He spoke my name over and over, using it like a key to unlock obedience. The servers played along beautifully. They returned to me between trips to his table, relaying his latest line. I told them to continue delivering exactly what he asked for, no matter how over the top. When he demanded a second bottle of the Barolo, they brought it without hesitation. When he asked if I had any rare desserts saved for close friends, the pastry chef assembled a towering plate of tiramisu, garnished with extra chocolate curls and a flourish of espresso drizzle. Each time, the man leaned back as though confirming his own status, and each time, the guests at surrounding tables glanced over, whispering to one another. He wasn't satisfied with simply eating and drinking. He needed an audience. At one point, I noticed him leaning toward the couple in the booth beside him. He was explaining how he and I went way back, that we had started in the business together, and that he had given me advice that made the restaurant successful. He even told them that he could get them a private tasting next month if they went through him. He gestured across the room to me, nodding as though we had just shared some silent confirmation of his story. It wasn't only lies about me. He layered on details of his supposed golf club membership, of business deals he had closed that very week, of celebrities he had dined with in New York. His voice rose and fell with practiced rhythm, projecting authority. He wasn't just eating dinner, he was building a stage. The staff began enjoying the performance almost as much as I did. They competed quietly to see who could coax out the most absurd claim. One server asked if he wanted to try the new truffle ravioli, and he immediately responded that I had created the dish for him years ago, specifically to pair with the wine he was drinking. Another asked if he wanted sparkling water, and he claimed that I always kept a certain imported brand in stock just for him. Each time, the lie grew taller, the web more tangled. From my spot at the edge of the room, I watched him carefully. His gestures became looser with each glass of wine, his voice carried further, and the confidence in his performance turned into something almost manic. The couple beside him stopped nodding politely and instead exchanged looks that made it clear they were no longer convinced. Other diners leaned back slightly in their chairs to watch, as though the evening's entertainment had shifted from food to spectacle. I stayed silent. I didn't approach, didn't interfere, didn't break the illusion. Every exaggerated order was approved, every fabricated story allowed to float into the room without challenge. He believed he was weaving a net that bound me to his narrative, but in reality, he was tightening a rope around his own neck. When the second bottle of wine was drained and the dessert plate wiped clean, he leaned back heavily against the booth. His voice lowered slightly, but his tone shifted from boastful to expectant. He had built his part, delivered his performance, and now he was waiting for the payoff. That was when I knew the moment was close. By the time the plates had been cleared and only empty wine glasses and crumpled napkins remained, I could feel the tension shift. The man had gone from booming declarations and sweeping gestures to something quieter, more deliberate. He leaned back in the booth with both arms stretched across the seat, his chest rising heavily after the long evening of eating and drinking. His eyes scanned the room like a king surveying his court, and when he spotted me moving past, he crooked his finger, summoning me as though I were his attendant rather than the owner of the place. I walked over slowly, not rushing, letting him think he had control of the situation. He straightened his posture when I reached the table, as though preparing for a business negotiation. He lowered his voice just enough so that only the closest tables could overhear, ensuring that there was still an audience for his finale. He began by thanking me for always taking such good care of him. He reminded me, loud enough for others to catch, that our friendship went back years, that I had always treated him as more than a customer. Then he shifted into promises for the future. He spoke about how he would arrange for us to meet at his golf club the following week, how he could introduce me to some of his contacts, how he would open doors for him in ways he couldn't imagine. It was a practiced performance, the closing act of his play. He had spun the story of our supposed history all evening, and now he was cementing it with promises of future favors. Finally, he leaned closer, lowering his voice again as if sharing a secret. He said that, of course, there would be no bill tonight, that I always covered his dinners, that this was just how things were between us. He smiled like it was a foregone conclusion, like he had just revealed the punchline of a joke we both understood. His hand made a casual, dismissive wave toward the empty plates, as if to erase the cost of the wine, the pasta, the dessert. He expected me to nod and walk away. I didn't. I stood there, arms loosely crossed, letting the silence grow. The tables around us grew still as diners pretended not to watch. He shifted slightly under the quiet, clearly waiting for my confirmation. I tilted my head, smiled, and agreed with him, but in my own way. I told him there would indeed be no bill for him tonight. His grin widened instantly, relief flooding his face. He leaned back again, satisfied that the con had worked. That was the moment I turned the knife. I explained, calmly, that the reason there would be no bill was because the server had already charged it to his card earlier in the evening, when he handed it over without a thought. The smile froze on his lips. His posture stiffened. He asked what I meant, but I didn't give him room to spin another story. I clarified that I was Tony, the owner, and that we had never met before in our lives. The weight of the room shifted. Diners who had been eavesdropping straightened, waiting to see what would happen. The couple in the next booth exchanged a glance, stifling their amusement. His expression collapsed from smug confidence to stunned disbelief. He tried to insist that we went way back, that I must have forgotten, that perhaps I was confused. I shook my head, slow and deliberate, and told him I had been here every night for years, and that if he and I were old friends, I would remember. The silence stretched for several beats. All around us, the air hummed with quiet anticipation. He had spent the entire evening crafting his illusion, and in one short moment, it cracked wide open. For the first time that night, he had no script to fall back on. The man froze in the booth, his hand still hovering over the edge of the table as if reaching for a lifeline. His face went pale, and for the first time that night, his chest slumped forward slightly. He opened his mouth, probably planning another excuse, but the words never came. Around us, diners who had been watching discreetly now leaned slightly forward in their seats. The couple at the neighboring table smothered laughter behind their hands. Even the staff stopped mid-step, servers with trays paused, all waiting for the inevitable. I remained calm, letting the weight of the revelation sink in. I told him again, slowly, that I was Tony, the owner, and that every order he had demanded, every claim he had made about friendship, advice, and past favors had been a fabrication. His eyes darted around the room, scanning faces, searching for allies, witnesses, anyone who might validate his story, and found none. The confidence that had carried him through the evening collapsed visibly. I stepped closer, leaning casually against the booth, and explained that the card he had handed to the server earlier had already been charged. Every bottle of wine, every appetizer, every extravagant seafood dish had been processed as normal. There would be no special treatment tonight because there was no special connection, only the standard rules that apply to every other guest.
He stammered, trying to insist there must be some mistake, but I interrupted, making it clear that the situation was entirely his doing. He had built the illusion himself, believing his fabricated stories would manipulate me. Now he was faced with the consequences of his own assumptions. He picked up the check, signed it, and did so with a tremor in his hand. I watched carefully, making no move to hurry him, letting the moment linger. The diners around us shifted, a few exchanging amused glances. The couple next to him leaned back in their seats, smiling without pretense, while others whispered quietly among themselves. My staff watched from the sidelines, trying not to laugh openly, clearly savoring the poetic justice of the scene. Sarah, standing a few feet away, raised an eyebrow, mouthing a silent, well played, as she returned to managing the rest of the floor. Finally, he rose from the booth, crumpled napkin in hand, and made his exit. His steps were brisk, shoulders tense, as though the air of entitlement he had carried in had been stripped away by every gaze in the room. The door closed behind him with a muted thud that sounded almost ceremonial, signaling the end of his performance. I straightened my apron, returned to the kitchen, and watched the staff resume their rhythm. The tables buzzed with low conversations again, diners returning to their meals. The performance was over, and in its place, a quiet satisfaction filled the room. Every plate, every order, every glass of wine had been accounted for, and the man had left paying for every extravagance he had tried to claim as his own. In that moment, I realized the lesson was clear. Patience and observation often outweigh confrontation. By letting him play his hand fully, I had allowed him to entangle himself in his own web, only to extract the truth calmly and decisively. And in doing so, the evening ended exactly as it should have, with fairness maintained, the staff entertained, and the restaurant back in control. After he stormed out, the room buzzed again, diners returning to their meals, staff moving efficiently, laughter quietly spreading at nearby tables. I straightened my apron, checked the kitchen, and let the moment sink in. Every dish, every bottle, every lie had been paid for by M. Watching him leave under his own weight was enough. No yelling, no confrontation. Patience had done the work. Sometimes, letting someone dig their own trap is the most satisfying way to enforce the rules.